It's good enough for practicing the Dhamma. It's good enough for what we need. And that sense of contentment is supported by a lot of the minor rules in the Vinaya. So a lot of these minor rules keep bringing us back to these basic qualities of mind: contentment, gratitude, being satisfied with just a little. Even when there's a lot, just being satisfied with just a little. One time Ajahn Chah was given a very prestigious title called a Jaukunship. And this was a story that I just heard recently from Ajahn Sucitto. And he said that Ajahn Chah traveled to Bangkok, and these Jaokun titles, or honorary recognitions, were given out by the king to special monastics who were recognized. And so when he got to Bangkok, and they were preparing to go into the king's palace, the city monks were all dressed in their very fancy robes. They usually had quite a few sets, and so they were dressed in their fancy robes and, all pressed and kind of tied up. And then Ajahn Chah arrives, and he's just got his very simple, country, rough robes, forest monk robes, dyed with a natural dye. And he looked like a real country bumpkin. And he had his bowl. He was carrying his bowl with him. And apparently some of the other monks said, "What'd you bring your bowl for? We're going into the palace, the king's palace. What's the king going to say, when you bring your bowl into the palace?" And Ajahn Chah said, "Well, what would the Buddha say if I didn't?" So for Ajahn Chah, from my understanding of the way Ajahn Chah used the Vinaya as a training tool, one of the main emphases was on using it to develop mindfulness, sati, this continuous awareness throughout the entire day. And so many of the minor rules, the protocols, the etiquette in the monastery are based on that, and they require a continuous mindfulness, because almost everything that we do, there's a proper way to do it. And it takes mindfulness, it takes awareness. And something as simple as washing our bowl, drying our bowl, that becomes the meditation object. So when Ajahn Chah was using the Vinaya as a teaching and training tool, he was talking about developing a mindfulness it was not just a mindfulness that was based on a very refined aspect of a meditation technique, or a mindfulness that was located just at the tip of your nose, but a mindfulness that was applicable in every situation, which would be aware of everything that's going on in a particular situation. You come into a particular situation, a group, you very carefully, very intuitively suss out, okay, well, this is what the situation is. And if people are very mindful like that, then naturally proper behavior follows. So a lot of the monastic etiquette that we have is based on developing this type of mindfulness, a continuous awareness, moment by moment. Because then when we do sit down to meditation, it's not like we've just been allowing our minds to wander. We've been training in meditation, training in mindfulness, moment by moment. And then when we sit down to meditate, boom, we're right there. Close our eyes, and there's a seamless continuity of training throughout the day. Something as simple as bowing. Ajahn Chah would encourage us to bow every time we came into our hut, every time we left. And this practice then has been passed down. So when I was a young monk, Ajahn Chah was no longer teaching. He was still alive, but no longer teaching. So almost everything that I learned about his way of relating to the Vinaya came from his immediate disciples. And something as simple as bowing, becomes a real meditation practice, because every time you come into your kuti, bow 3 times to the shrine, Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. If you don't have a shrine, then you bow to your bowl 3 times. And if you do that with even a little bit of sincerity, you say, I'm bowing. A bow is like lowering our head, lowering what is considered high, lowering our ego and placing it down in front of our higher ideals, things we respect, Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. And just doing that repeatedly, 3 times when you enter your hut. You go out to the toilet, bow 3 times. Come into the meditation hall, you bow 3 times. You sit down in your seat in the meditation hall, you bow 3 times. You get up, you bow 3 times. And each time that we do that, it's like just a little drop of wholesome karma. One more good intention. And then that begins to accumulate. They're very simple practices. These are not extremely complicated. But just the cumulative effect of bowing, bowing, bowing with a heart that is full of devotion for the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. It forms a very strong foundation then for meditation. And then Ajahn Chah would, he wouldn't just say bow anyways, he would have a very particular way to bow. So when you're bowed, you have to really be in your body. And so this kind of practice is very good for people who are a bit intellectual. You just get your awareness in your body, right? I think he had quite a bit of fun with the Westerners sometimes, and their strange ways of bowing. He said, no, get your butt down. Get your butt down. No, don't put your hands out here. Hands here. Yeah, that's right. Here, here. But because even something as simple as a bow, to do it properly, you have to develop mindfulness. You have to be mindful of what you're doing. So the way Ajahn Chah used the Vinaya as a training tool encompassed all these different aspects of the Vinaya. It was a convention that led one gradually away from worldly habits. A convention that gradually led to a sense of communal harmony. Because practically speaking, if we're living in a group, it's just so much easier if everyone's doing things in a particular way. If you live in communities, then it would be nice if everyone could live in absolute harmony without any rules. And in the early, very early part of the Buddha's teaching career, that's the way it was, because everyone was a fully enlightened arhat. But in those communities which everyone is not a fully enlightened arhat, then it can be very helpful to have the Vinaya as a training guide. And so Ajahn Chah never encouraged a blind following of the Vinaya, but using it as a tool to develop wisdom. It was very powerful, because if we're living in community and we have a certain framework that we're following, then inevitably it comes up. Our ego, our sense of self, our desires will come up against that. And that's precisely the place where we can practice. And say, well, I don't really feel like doing it right now. Doesn't matter. You do it anyways. You say, well, why do we have to do it this way? Why can't we do it that way? Well, it's true. It doesn't really matter if we do it this way or that way, but our community has agreed to do it this way. So we do it that way. And so all these views and opinions and attachments to views and opinions that can come up, just reflect back to us. Okay, am I suffering? Where's the suffering coming from? Is it really coming from some external situation? No, it's coming from my own mind. And so these very simple daily experiences, washing the spittoons, attending on the senior monks, very good for developing wholesome states of mind. There's a lot of respect for elders in the Vinaya. And again, this is a quality which is easily disappearing in our modern society. And respect for elders, it's not about whether the elder is enlightened or not. A lot of what we do in our communities is just based on who has ordained first. And then respect is paid according to that. And the junior ones serve the senior ones, and the senior ones then have responsibilities towards the junior ones, and it's a beautiful system. And it encourages this constant wholesome states of mind coming up. Say, well, how can I help? How can I help? If we're given the job of being an attendant for a senior monastic, then the junior one could be looking, well, how can I make life easier for the senior one? How can I do things which will assist them in some way? How can I make life a bit more comfortable for them? And this type of thinking just goes against the habit of selfishness. And again, it just creates good karma. There's just so many opportunities for developing good karma, for developing the paramis in these daily acts of monastic life. Recently we had a lot of senior monks visiting our monastery in New Zealand, and for me it was fantastic because I got to be a junior monk again, which I enjoy it better the second time around. But just having the opportunity to go to the senior monks and offering a foot massage, it's like, it's great, it's joyful. It's like, what a wonderful opportunity to increase a little physical pleasure or reduce a little physical suffering for the senior monk. If you've ever done a meditation retreat, then some of the monastic etiquette is very useful to develop a sense of consideration and kindness. Again, sometimes just following rules, you think, well, just blindly following rules, but if you understand the purpose behind them, very good for pointing us back to developing wholesome states of mind. For example, if you're in a meditation retreat, then developing a sense of bodily silence is a very considerate and compassionate way to relate to everyone around you. Because we all affect each other. And especially in a meditation retreat where people are, they are developing a sense of silence. And so not only just keeping noble silence in speech, but also developing a physical silence. That takes a lot of mindfulness. You have to be mindful. You have to be aware of how your body's moving, getting up from your seat and doing it quietly, and sitting down, doing it quietly. If you have to sneeze or cough, then try to muffle it so it doesn't make much sound. All of these things then give rise to a sense of kindness and consideration, which then again accumulates and creates a harmony within a community. So the way that Ajahn Chah used the Vinaya then is beneficial as a mental training on many, many different levels, from the most, say, gross, as just stopping us from making bad karma, right down to very refined daily things. Because he said, really, once you're living the monastic life, it's not the major rules which lead you to enlightenment, it's the minor rules. Because you would never go out and kill someone, kill an animal, or steal. Right? But these minor rules we're developing and working with all the time, forcing us, encouraging us to be very mindful, to give rise to wholesome states of mind. This discipline, and the purpose of discipline, leads to the sense of restraint, and the sense of restraint leads to the sense of freedom from remorse. And freedom from remorse is just a sense of feeling good about oneself. If you've lived a life which you haven't been intentionally trying to harm anyone else, you've done your best to live a life which is harmless, which is beneficial, which is wholesome, that naturally gives rise to a sense of freedom from remorse. I think it's like a wholesome sense of self-esteem. And that gives rise to joy, and leading on to tranquility, and that gives rise to a sense of rapture and happiness. And once you have happiness arising from this lifestyle, then when you sit down to meditation, the mind concentrates easily. And when the mind concentrates easily, then it gives rise to seeing things as they truly are, as a natural consequence. And then that leads on to the fading away. Fading away of passion, turning away from being enchanted with the world, which does then give rise to a sense of liberation. So from the very beginning stages right to the very end, Ajahn Chah would see the Vinaya as going hand in hand with the Dhamma. You can't really separate them. From washing the spittoons right to Nibbana, as they say in New Zealand, it's all good. So I offer this for your reflection today.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Yeah, my way into Luang Por Chah's profound teaching was one that, again, it came right abrupt in one situation when I was in the monastery in northeast Thailand, where Luang Por Sumedho spoke about, Wat Panana Chat. At the time I left Germany for want of a place to develop my practice in meditation. From the moment I decided to actually go to this monastery, it was almost like going on a slide. It's like you sit on a slide and everything just goes automatic. Everything seemed to be somehow pointing towards Wat Pananachat. Whenever I traveled for the few weeks before I decided to finally make my way to the northeast, everybody was talking about Wat Pananachat, saying, you should really go there, this is the place. And so when I walked into this forest, and every time I go back to Nanachat, it's just the memory I retain. It's just walking into this forest. The trees are sort of arching as you walk into the forest, and everything is all of a sudden cool, and you walk into this almost like an alley, which is like covered in these trees, and the sound of the cicada, sound of the animals, and it was just such a wonderful feeling. The very first time I walked in there, I really felt at home. It was kind of like a coming home kind of feeling, and I'd never really been a Buddhist before. I just went there on recommendation of someone, but somehow that was the place I was meant to go. And just seeing the monks going about their chores, sweeping, doing simple things quietly, mindfully, it was a time that it stopped me. Every time I looked around me, I felt I had to stop him. I was stopping in my tracks, just seeing, looking, trying to observe. The encouragement in this monastery was meant to be for you to look, to see, to observe, to use every little facet of simple things during everyday life, to incorporate that into your attempt to be mindful, to practice, to be alert, to know, to learn about your own mind. Because after all, this is the teaching that stands out for me of Luang Por Chah. He was always pointing you back to your own mind. And for those of you who looked at the exhibition outside, very tastefully, beautifully done, I found it really moving just looking through it and reading the little bits and pieces, many of which of course I had read many times before. But for those of you who noticed the different pictures of Luang Por Chah, the different faces, it was Luang Por Chah had absolutely no paramita when it came to paintings. I don't think I know one single painting of Luang Por Chah that is actually really beautiful. Maybe I'd be happy to be corrected, but from my memory I've never seen any painting of Luang Por Chah that I really enjoyed, except maybe for one. I'm just reminded of one. But photography, he seemed to just have a face to be photographed. It's like there's so many beautiful pictures. If you look at the the biography of Luang Por Chah, there seem to be so many different faces of Luang Por Chah, and that's precisely what sort of touched me, or what I like about Luang Por Chah, because Luang Por Chah was not the same for everybody. As many people have said, joking or half joking, to each their own Ajahn Chah. Because depending on where you stood in your own practice, depending where you came from, your background, your skills in meditation, your ability to develop wisdom, Luang Por Chah would always pick up on that, and then he'd become the teacher that he needed to be for you at that particular time. And that was probably one of the great skills that Luang Por Chah had. He said of himself that he wasn't really anybody. He said, if you are anybody, you're always going to suffer. Doesn't matter who you try to be. And so precisely because Luang Por was nobody, that he could be anybody. And of course, I'm just talking here because I certainly, as much as the two monks who spoke before me, never really got to live with Ajahn Chah as he was still fit and healthy and able to teach. I arrived in Wat Pananachat at the time when Tanchen Pasano was the abbot, who was a direct disciple of Luang Por Chah, and who had the very love that you have heard other monks today speak about, that the monks would have for Luang Por Chah. And so he would try his best to really practice Luang Por Chah's teachings, and also being a teacher in his own right at that time, he used Luang Por Chah's methods to teach you. And so I learned via my teacher about all the things that perhaps Luang Por Sumeto and also Tanchen Dhamma will be able to speak out of first-hand experience. But for me, being in Wat Pananachat at that particular time was significant. It was just the right time. I needed to be there at that particular time. I already felt I was at the right time, at the right place. Everything seemed to be made to help me find my way. I was like a 20-year-old young kid. I was like a ball of clay that hadn't really taken shape yet, and I was ready to be netted into something, because at the time certainly I was still pretty much a mess. Just an adolescent who was not really sure of what he wanted to do with his life. So Luang Por Chah, of course, was sick at that time, but as Tan Siripanyo said before, we went every Uposatha day to pay respect to Luang Por Chah at his hospital kuti, where the monks would wheel him out in his wheelchair, paralyzed as he was, for us to do some chanting for him. This particular chanting that we did on that very day was recommended to us by a very highly attained meditation master, who said that Luang Por Chah would actually benefit from us chanting those chants for him. And so Champasno took that up, and so we went every week to do this chanting for 10 years, maybe even longer. And it was beautiful every day to go there, to be able to sit in front of Ajahn Chah. And much like Ajahn Siripanyo's experience was my own when I first saw this body that was obviously paralyzed and no longer capable, seemingly, to teach. But again, there it was, the real teaching of the Dhamma, old age, sickness and death. However, I just like to relate to you a story, because I was fortunate enough, as many other monks, when Luang Por Chah was sick, to be able to nurse him. There was a time when every fortnight there was a group of monks who would go to be the ones who would nurse him at that particular time. So they would be living in the hospital kuti with Luang Por Chah, taking turns of being around him 24 hours a day. One of the most amazing things for those of you who are into medical care and nursing and know a little bit about it was, after 10 years of lying in bed, Luang Por Chah never had developed any bed sores. It goes to show the care, the loving care that went into looking after him 24 hours a day. The monks were around him 24 hours a day during those 10 years that he was ill, before he finally passed away. And he was, when he needed to be in his body or with his body, he would be there when the monks did things like exercising him, or washing him, clothing him, taking him to the toilet, doing all the things that, as you know, a paralyzed body can no longer do. The functions have all ceased. There's nothing he could do by himself. He could not even sit up by himself. He would just lie there. He had to be turned, and everything had to be done for him. And then the monks would do that. And so I had just spent the most lovely 2 weeks upataking, looking after Longpo Cha at a night shift, and it was just truly amazing. Sometimes you just sit there by his bedside at night, quietly meditating in the silence and the stillness of the night, just knowing that somehow Longpo Cha's mind would probably be there, and whether you knew or you didn't know, but at least you perceived. Maybe you just wanted to perceive his presence, but it certainly was an amazing presence just to be around him, even at that state. But the story I wanted to tell you, because it is about a particular mental defilement that I'm sure all of you have to encounter from time to time, is the situation when we used to exercise Longpo Cha. You must imagine he would lie on his back and the monks would massage or exercise his arms and his legs, giving massage. And it was about 4 monks doing that at the time. And it was always the duty of one monk to make sure that Longpo Cha would not urinate into the bed, because obviously because he had no longer control over his bodily functions. Someone would have to take care of the fact that it was always be in a little bottle, and that had to be taken care of so that he wouldn't wet the bed, because then he'd have to take all the sheets off. You had to clean the whole place and start basically all over again. So I just had this lovely 2 weeks with some very mindful, lovely, beautiful monks, and I had asked for a second shift, which is another story I'd love to tell, but I won't have enough time. But I just was granted another 2 weeks shift, and so I was on this shift and we were exercising Longpo, but the group of monks I was with, they weren't so mindful. They were actually, in my opinion, quite almost a bit sloppy. They chatted among themselves while we were doing the exercises, and they seemed to not really be paying the kind of attention that me in my kind of Western righteous mind would have wanted them to pay, because there was the Grand Master and we were looking after him, we were exercising him, and sure enough they would have to be respectful and not be chatting and not be forgetting themselves. So I was getting a bit upset there. However, after about a good 5 or 10 minutes, Longpo Cha urinated into the bed. And I was really getting upset, because this monk obviously neglected his duty, he didn't do his job. So we had to clean the whole bed up, do the sheets new, start all over again. And again, they were chatting away. And for the second time, Longpo urinated into the bed. And I was getting really angry by that time. But of course, Asian culture in Thailand, you're not supposed to show anger, because it's an unwholesome mind state. So I tried to contain my anger as best I could. And sure enough, cleaned the bed up, took another good 10 minutes, new white sheets, everything, started exercising, and you wouldn't believe it, for the 3rd time, Longpo Cha urinated into the bed. And I just blew a fuse. I was a young 3 or 4 Vasa monk who just could no longer control his anger. And I blasted this monk, actually Laotian monk, who was actually senior to me by at least 1 year. And it was just absolutely unheard of that, a prafarang like myself would get so angry and to the point of, becoming loud and screaming and yelling and actually blasting this monk. But what happened was even more unbelievable and something that I will never forget for the rest of my life, because as you know, Luang Por Chah was paralyzed and he was not supposed to be able to move any of his limbs, let alone sit up. But he was lying on his back at that time, and as I was blasting this monk, Luang Por Chah by himself sat up just from the lying position and started shaking. The whole body was shaking because he needed obviously to put a lot of effort into exercising control over the body to the extent that he could actually sit up. He went into these convulsions, and he sat up and he stared straight into my eyes with a look that I will never forget for the rest of my life. And I was just even saying it, my hair stands on end, and I start almost shivering because it was just an experience that was just awesome. And of course, he didn't say anything because he could no longer speak. But he didn't need to say anything either, because the message was absolutely clear and evident and plain there and then at that moment. It doesn't matter, and that was the message I got out of it for myself. It doesn't matter what anybody else does. You need to look after your own mind. It doesn't matter what other people do. You do not need to get angry over anything. So the message was, again, pointing back to our own minds. The need to develop our own hearts, to develop our own mind. That's where the Dhamma lies. The Dhamma is not found anywhere other than inside our own hearts. It's the liberation of the mind that the Buddha taught as the goal for 45 years. And so this experience for me was one of the highlights of my being around Luang Por Chah, and just the enormous delight and gratitude and appreciation of being able to nurse him, and just having to have the privilege of being able to do that was something that I really cherish. I really cherish the memories of those times I had where I was able to be close and around him. So Wat Pananachat in those days was a place where I came to decide. I didn't actually decide to ordain there, but the experience that made me finalize that decision took place there. Again, it's something that I would refer back to the teachings that I received and read and later on heard on tape from Luang Por Chah. I made that decision to become a monk in a situation where I was bathing at a well. In those days you had these clay urns where you took a dipper and just used that for washing. Wasn't any showers in those days. And I was bathing all by myself in the forest there at one of these clay urns, and all of a sudden I started crying. And tears would run down my face, and at the same time I perceived this very profound inner sense of joy and happiness. And it was a seemingly totally schizophrenic situation. I mean, how can you be totally happy and at the same time cry? Because it wasn't tears of joy, it was actually tears of sadness. And yet I was very, very happy, very, very joyful. And it was only in retrospect that I realized what was actually going on there. because I realized I had finally found a path that would make sense, because from the very moment I came and started reading Luang Por Chah's teaching, and because they were the teachings that got me into the Dhamma, there weren't any scriptures. I mean, there wasn't even a complete Tripitaka set in Wat Pananachat at the time. So the teachings there were the teachings of the forest teachers, and obviously Luang Por Chah. So for me, the decision there was clear, because I was crying, because I knew I would have to leave behind a lot of familiar things. I'd have to leave behind my parents, my friends and relatives, my country, and that made me sad, because I knew I probably wouldn't see them for a long time. And indeed, after I made that decision, I never went back to Germany for over 7 years. But at the same time, I was so happy, because I found something that really made sense, a teaching that really seemed to lead to liberation. That was always pointing back at the one thing that is worthwhile not only cultivating and developing, but also worthy of liberating, and that's the mind. To me, the path always made a lot more sense by in looking at it in the sense that there is something there in this mass of suffering that is worthy of liberation, that is worth liberating. To me, that was always something that inspired me. And so that's why the teachings that would always point back to the mind and ultimate liberation of the mind would always be the teachings that I found the most useful. What I actually thought of doing today, and I was sort of shifting back and forth, because I didn't know which way to go, and I didn't really want to prepare anything. But what I did bring, not so much as a backup in case I run out of things to say, but it's something that I've done a while ago, and now I'm actually thinking it might be a nice thing to do, because what I've done a while back is, having just said in the beginning how everybody has their own Ajahn Chah, so I kind of collected my own Ajahn Chah, or better to say I collected the teachings, or I collected the things that inspired me about Ajahn Chah. So some of it is biographical, in the sense that it's like how he started out to practice, and it's about the early years. Some of it is experiences in his own meditation, some is to do with teaching, some is to do with his own liberation of mind, and some of the more profound teachings. So I kind of gathered those aspects and teachings that really sort of reached and touched my heart, and I did something perhaps a little bit cheeky, because it's not usually done, but I've actually translated them into verse. I mean, they're obviously prose teachings, but I translated them into verse, because for me, verse, which has a great place in the suttas as well, and there was a lot of verses in the teachings of the Buddha and his disciples, and in fact many of the Krubajan today have uttered great verses, lovely poems. Most famous one obviously Luang Pu Man's Ballad of the Liberation from the Khandas. And but I realized, just reading through the teachings and gathering them, there was so much in there that would lend itself to be put into prose, because into verse, because verse, it commits itself to memory so much easier, and it flows very nicely. And so what I'd like to do with just the remaining time I have is just to read out to you those verses that I composed of some of the teachings that really touched my heart of Luang Por Chah, and hope that perhaps I have a few more minutes after that to just pick up one or two of those aspects that I think might be relevant for your own practice. So So these are my translations, I must say, of Luang Por Chah, and I try to be obviously as accurate as I could, but as verse being verse, that might not always be so easy. I turned to Dhamma, seeking knowledge, yearning for the truth. Why is this wretched and deluded world so miserable? This lifetime I give up, both mind and body I resolved, and I shall follow to the letter what the Buddha taught, intent on reaching understanding in this very life, because in case I won't, I'll still be sunk in suffering. I'll treat my life as though it were a single night and day. There's nothing in this world I won't renounce or give away. No matter how much hardship I'll endure and persevere, since otherwise I'll just keep doubting, things will have no end. When I look back upon the days when practicing alone among the forests in the hills on lonely mountain peaks, I see the pains and tribulations that were most extreme, and yet while fraught with hardship, they would give me so much joy. The pain and joy went hand in hand like eating pega leaves when grilled and dipped in ground-up ginger mixed with chili sauce. Although the taste is most delicious, it's extremely hot. It's tasty though the snot is running, groaning you can't stop. That's how I recollect the practice of the early days. What is of great importance when we're practicing at first is physical seclusion, and to see it as the cause providing the occasion for seclusion of the mind, which will in turn, as taught by Sariputta Thera once, give rise to the seclusion from defilements in the heart. When in seclusion, you will practice, thus you'll see the truth. A teacher, though, can give advice where you've been going wrong. In fact, it is the places where you really think you're right, where wrongly understanding things contaminates your thoughts. The forest masters taught the way for rooting out conceit, wrong view, and self-delusion and defilements from the heart. You're dealing with the flesh and blood of these kilesas here. However hard it seems, don't disregard their practices, the fundamentals that our teachers handed down to us. If you keep walking in the footsteps of these noble ones, like Luang Pu Sao and Luang Pu Man and Luang Pu Thongrat too, or Tancho Kunupali, then the path you're following is most direct, for they have realized Dhamma for themselves. Applying Dhamma, bringing it to bear, you must be tough. It's grave, not light, no airy thing. You've got to give your life. If tigers eat you or some elephant should trample you, so be it. Having kept your precepts pure, you are at ease. There's nothing more to worry. It's as though already dead. In case of death, what should you fear when nothing's left to die? This single weapon of the Dhamma brought me victory on mountain tops across the country, triumphing alone. When letting go becomes complete, you dare to give your life. I thought and saw the Buddha's weapon strengthening the mind. Among the weapons in the world, the Dhamma reigned supreme. I kept reflecting, looking, seeing, knowing for myself. The mind, when seeing, penetrates completely into things, while that's the truth of suffering. Cessation is like this. And so contentment does arise, the mind is set at ease. But those who look at suffering, not penetrating it, contented with the peace and calm they feel from time to time, have really got no way to know this truth within themselves. Those unafraid of death won't die, who gladly give their lives, let suffering transcend itself and reach its final end, thus comprehend the truth and see the truth, the nature of all things, for truly that has worth and value, leading to a mind indomitable, valiant, staunch, unshaken, come what may. Of people, creatures, or the jungle, it will know no fear. All this is application of the mind that's well sustained. You raise a point and then sustain it to investigate. Vitakka and vichara thus will work in unison. You penetrate the matter until piti floods the mind. My hair would stand on end reflecting, walking chankama, or I would bring to mind the virtues of the triple gem, and rapture would pervade the body, thus refreshing it. I'd sit there while the mind welled up to overflow with joy, recalling what I did to rise above all obstacles. The tears would start to fall, and I felt ever more inclined to struggle on with inspiration and to persevere without the question of discouragement at any time. There was initial application of the mind, and then there was the application of the mind that was sustained, and there were joy and happiness with wisdom that was based on application of the mind and on that happiness which was so solidly established and was anchored well. Now you could say it was dependent on the energy or strength of jhana at that moment if you're so inclined. It's as it was, but if you want to name it, go ahead. Before too long, Vitakka and Vichara were renounced. Then Piti Sukha was abandoned, leaving just the mind, one-pointed, firmly gathered in samadhi, well sustained, and thus the peace that is the bedrock that yields wisdom was attained. I had the insight that through practice we will know and see. To study and to think about it is a different thing, as all assumptions, guessing at the way things ought to be, turn out to be in contrast to the way they really are. So now I was content, no matter whether fat or thin, while fit and healthy or while sick and weak, I was content. I never wondered where my mother was, nor did I think of family or friends, but in my mind I just resolved, if I should die, I die, that's it, and that was all there was. I had no worries left, and there was no more holding back. The mind was firm, invigorated, and it pushed me on. You'll have to practice, lest your hesitations never end. However much you study Dhamma, all the talks you hear, the knowledge that you gain from that won't take you quite as far as will the truth itself, and thus you're never freed from doubt. But if your knowledge is a realization of the truth, then things will reach completion. They'll be coming to an end. I don't know how you'd put it. It just happens naturally. The mind that's genuine arises ineluctably. When all phenomena are merely viewed as elements, the mind won't be deluded by whatever object known. It can't be shaken, it will not encounter suffering. Conventional realities, when known for what they are, give way to ultimate reality. The truth is seen. Not understanding where the difference lies between the mind and all the states of mind that will arise and pass away, we take those states for real, as if they were the mind itself. As soon as Luang Pu Man had clarified this point for me, I realized if we see this, we can stop and put things down. The mind that's pure is neither happiness nor suffering. No vedana is felt at all within its purity. Unsullied thus, it's independent, clear and radiant. If you can understand this point, there's not a lot to do. Although we use the world's conventions to communicate, deep down we must be empty, for the mind's above these things. We take to freedom the abiding of the noble ones. To free ourselves from Mara's trap, we have to watch the mind, while that which knows will do the watching as we're keeping guard. We'll see the objects taken up and clung to by the mind as valueless and by their nature undesirable. The moment thoughts are known and seen for what they truly are, the mind will stop proliferating and transcend them all. When in the stillness of samadhi you attend to sounds, I realized you can hear them, but while staying with the mind, within its emptiness, it's quiet and no sound occurs. When it arises into consciousness and you're alert, you see the separateness between the knowing and the sound. The object and the mind are not combined, but quite distinct. There's no connection here between the two phenomena. Reflecting thus, I realized the importance of this point. The continuity of things, when broken, leads to peace. Where continuity of things prevailed, now peace emerged. The boost of energy aroused by the experience inspired me to make an all-out effort practicing. When later on I stopped to meditate so formally, the mind continued with its meditation as before, and still as calm and peaceful as I was, I went to rest. About to touch the pillow with my head as I lay down, the mind began inclining inwards, moving deep inside. I didn't know where to, but it just kept on moving in. As if a current sent along a cable hit a switch, the body shattered and exploded from the inside out. The sound was deafening while the awareness in the mind was at that moment crystal clear and at its most refined. Beyond a point, it seemed as though the mind had been cut loose and moved towards its deepest and most quiet spot inside. It settled there within a realm of utter emptiness, which nothing from outside could penetrate, where nothing reached. And having stayed there for some time, the mind withdrew. I don't mean that I made the mind withdraw, I merely watched, just witnessing the mind returning to its normal state. What happened was the question that arose. The answer came. There is no need to doubt such natural phenomena. According to conditions, they arise and pass away. Reflecting thus, the mind accepted it and paused a while, inclining inward once again without me doing it. And deep inside it came upon that switch it hit before. Again the body shattered into tiny particles. Cut loose once more, the mind slipped into silence deep within, a state of peace and calm still more profound, where nothing reached. And following its own momentum, having stayed some time, without me doing or directing it, the mind withdrew. While simply staying with the knowing, I just watched it all. With no more doubt arising, I went on to contemplate, and for the third time very soon the mind inclined within, when I experienced the world completely vanishing, as this whole planet turned into the element of space. Continuing to dwell within until its time was up, and staying longer on this third occasion than before, the mind withdrew, returning to its normal state once more. What I have related here concerns the mind that's genuine, how its reality can truly be experienced. You need both confidence in Dhamma and sincerity to keep on deepening the practice. Be prepared to die. The time will come when this whole world turns upside down, inverting both your view and understanding of the truth. If people see you at the time, they'll likely think you're mad. For after such experiences, nothing is the same. It will transform the way you view the people in the world, but you are the only one who will have seen things in this way. Your whole perception of reality is changed around. The way you think about the world is altered drastically. When other people talk like this, you will talk in other ways. When other people walk up one way, you will walk down here. You're not the same as other human beings anymore. From then you'll often gain these states, and they will last for long. The mind is at its boldest here, most firm and confident. Its energy and power go beyond what you'd expect. This is the power of samadhi when it's at its peak. It is the power still derived from samatha alone, but as a basis for developing vipassana, it will enable you to contemplate proficiently. Samadhi is the resting place of all practitioners. It was the Buddha's base from which to contemplate the truth. The thing then that was crucial was to clearly understand and to refine the practice down within the mind itself. When looking at my body or at someone else's form, and there arose attraction, I would seek to find a cause. I'd contemplate the body, break it down into its parts. I'd look at head hair, body hair, at nails and teeth and skin. The Buddha taught to contemplate the body frequently, dissect it, peel the skin off, and incinerate it all. Keep meditating thus until the mind is firm and still. Unwavering within the meditation on the foul, you walk for alms and see but corpses tottering along. And making effort, practicing like this, you bring the mind to deeply contemplate and see the body's transience. So when you see a pretty woman and you feel her pull, you bring to mind the image of a decomposing corpse, decaying, rotting, oozing matter, livid, putrefied. You contemplate like this on each occasion, thus the mind maintains a distance and it won't get lost in the allure. Because the truth is clearly seen, no longer do you doubt the nature of the body being to decay and rot. Make every effort that you can, reflecting till the foul becomes a clear perception firmly rooted in the mind, where seeing anyone is like you're looking at a corpse. You see a man, a woman, or yourself, and you see a corpse. Thus everybody in the end becomes a rotting corpse. It's quite enjoyable, if only you get down to it. So train yourself until it's second nature to the mind. Emerging from samadhi, sometimes images appear, depicting